Let's begin with a poem by Peg Reitman that's inspired by this month's theme, the June flowering. June. June sweeps over the back deck. The bee balm has exploded into high, vigorous crowns of purple and red spikes. In the herb garden, the chives have flowered, overdoing things as usual. Only the basil and thyme seem modestly restrained amidst plumes of waving lemongrass and leggy parsley. June is busting out into profusion. If I listen carefully, I can hear her voice humming within me. Good morning, I'm Richard Schramm, the service coordinator, your guide to today's service. Welcome to this caring, sharing community on this warm and sticky kind of Sunday, June 30th. Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. We welcome you to the North Chapel, where we aspire to be a congregation that nurtures the growth and supports the needs of its members, sustains a strong spiritual life within a loving church community, and seeks to have a positive impact on the world around us. A special welcome to anyone who is visiting today, and if they are up for it, they perhaps could stand and say their name and where they're from. And if not, if there are visitors who, if they would be so kind to sign the guest book in the back of the sanctuary. Please turn off your cell phones. David Freeman will be here to be with the children, so he's coming at 10:14 is the very precise. As far as announcements, please join us after the service. It'll be downstairs instead of on the front porch. Downstairs are coffee, tea, and limeade. Are there other announcements here? So you see the order of service and website for other announcements. Our minister, Leon Dunkley, will give the reflection this morning. It's entitled, Free Pulpit and Pew, Free Spirit. As usual, the description of Leon's reflection has me thinking. He writes, how important is it to have a free spirit? What does it mean to allow the soul to soar, particularly when life brings hardship and tragedy? Let's talk about the power we possess as a community that keeps us free. So I thought, well, okay, where do we start on this? I think we need to do a little stretching, a little thinking ahead of time. So to open our minds to the idea of free spirit, to the process of allowing our souls to soar, I turned to Mary Oliver and Rainier Maria Rilke. Oliver's poem, The Journey, seems to me a poem about freeing one's spirit. It makes me think about what holds me back from being my full or my true self. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles, mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night and the road full of fallen branches and stones, but little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. So that got me thinking about what it means to free your spirit, to be your full self. And then at the question of soul and soul, allowing the soul to soar. That's a wonderful image. And the only thing that came to mind about that was Rilke's poem, Widening Circles, another one that's well known, I believe. I live my life in widening circles. that reach out across the world. I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it. I circle around God, around the primordial tower. I've been circling for thousands of years, and I still don't know. Am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song?
In a kingdom long ago, there was a weaver who spun stories out of thread. One day, an owl, white as winter, perched in a nearby tree. "I should like to make my story be woven out of clouds," the owl said. "As you wish," said the weaver. And the owl brought the woman strings of clouds as round as pearls, but every time she tried to weave them in and out, they would dissolve quietly as dew upon the grass. The owl blinked his eyes. "Perhaps we should add some moonlight," he said, "the kind that shimmers on the water." "As you wish," said the weaver. But though the owl brought baskets of jeweled moonbeams worth more than the king's own crown, the story's cloth still would not take shape. "I don't understand," said the owl. "I have chosen beautiful things for the weaving of my story." "Ah," said the woman. "But sometimes the cloth will pattern itself whether we will or no. You must bring everything, things chosen and things not." And the owl flew over the mountain and through the valleys and gathered jade green as ginkgo leaves and raspberries red as blood, and flew past the villages and the countries ravaged by war. When he returned with all the things that he had found, the weaver smiled. "These will do," she said. And she took the things that the owl had brought, the threads of sunlight fine as silk and cobwebs gray as skulls, and she wove them into a cloth. And when the owl pulled his story around him, it was so full of woe and gladness, so beautiful and so strong, that when he stretched out his new-made wings, people thought that he was an angel hovering in a breathless sky. I watched a documentary a few days ago on YouTube. It was a story about a woman, 25-year-old woman, who was in a crisis. Her name was Katie. Talented young woman, beautiful. She came from a wealthy family, and in no time at all, and without warning, she fell on harder times. When harder times came down on Katie, and harder times will come down on all of us, something deep within the family shattered. The rich grandfather died, and the money ran out, and the roaring river of family life seemed to lose its current, seemed to lose its flow. Katie had been the star child, the northern star, the constancy, the still point around which the whole constellation seemed to turn, until that changed. It wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just the death of the grandfather, and it wasn't just the new money situation. It wasn't just the sudden difference in the natural flow of things. You couldn't pin it down, but life was suddenly all brand new and not in such a good way. Shattered, Katie coped with harder times by overusing alcohol. Just like us, Katie's complex. There are many sides to her, and she doesn't reduce to oversimplicity or caricature, and neither do we. So Katie wasn't a party girl. She didn't drink to wash away her sorrows. She was carrying a burden that was too great for her to bear, and she might not have really known that she was doing so. So party girl, that's the language of TV shows. Alcohol wasn't her escape, as is true of so many compulsive patterns and addictive behaviors. Katie's overuse of alcohol was a bad idea that became more dangerous over time. Her short-term survival strategy was not a long-term solution, and she knew it. The documentary was called Katie's Binge Drinking Stems from a Devastating Secret Intervention. It was produced by A&E Arts and Entertainment. Now, I'm not sharing this story because I'm interested in moralizing about Katie's choices. I am not interested in that. I'm not sharing this story because I am different than Katie or better than Katie somehow, because I have made different choices in life. I am not different than Katie. I'm not better than her. We're not really different, and we're not really better, and we're not really worse than one another in life, not in a meaningful way, not in a way that is genuinely life-saving. I'm sharing the story about Katie because Katie's story is also about us. She'd been quite close to her grandfather, the one who passed away. Her grandfather was powerful and generous. He was the wealthy benefactor. He was the source. He was the river current in the life of the family. And when he died, the river current seemed to change its course. So the flow of life broke the riverbank and spilled out onto land that was parched and dry. Her mother was suffering, her father was suffering, her sister was suffering, and Katie was suffering. Everyone was suffering, and everyone was suffering all by themselves in isolation. Sometimes it's the inability to talk to one another that hurts the most. They couldn't find a way to grieve together, and so they didn't. And instead, they blamed each other for one another's pains and for the way they were feeling. And in many ways, their accusations weren't wrong. They were accurate. We all have real flaws, many. When I was in seminary, I began to notice something about myself. I began to notice something about my fellow seminarians. We seemed quite comfortable in easy moralizing. We would pick a question, we would choose a cultural or political point of view, and then we would preach. We would preach about how obviously right we were about whatever the subject was, and in a way that we would continue to be right. Being right is often quite easy. We were good at being right. We were righteous, winsome, and compelling. We were clever and persuasive. We were funny sometimes, but we were seldom wholly under God. Now, I know for some of us, God language is hard to hear sometimes, and we should face that moment honestly. There are good reasons why some of us are resistant to God language. Many of us have been confused or confounded or otherwise hurt by religious authority. It's very real. God language also often reminds us of that pain. Poorly articulated theology never does any one of us any good. So when we get triggered, we recoil by nature. We withdraw, we pull away. Once burned, twice shy, they say. This makes sense to me, so naturally, logically, or at least sequentially, we start to erect boundaries. We make rules to shield us from the pain, and we develop a verbal practice, a communication strategy that keeps God language over there, away from us, and a beloved community conversations over here, close to us. And those who experience God language and beloved community as the same thing feel a sense of strain. Feel the strain of wounds that have not yet healed, feel the weight of burdens that we didn't know that we were carrying. It's like we can't do the translation anymore, and we gave up and we threw in the towel. So now when we get out of the shower, we're just standing there soaking wet. Because we think that it's easier than healing. And it may be. I don't have judgment about this. We're all wherever we are along the path, and it's all holy when the heart is in the holy place. Do you know that hymn? Have we sung it here? When the heart is in a holy place, when the heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place. And then the 3 verses come in. When we trust the wisdom in each of us, when we tell our stories from deep inside, when we share the silence of sacred space. These are the first lines of each of the verses, but it's the 3rd line in each of the verses that really moves me. When we see our faces in each other's eyes. When we hear our voices in each other's words. When we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. This interpersonal part, this fellowship part, this relational part is the benefit of doing the translation, is the benefit of not throwing in the towel and giving up. You know what happens when we don't, right? When we don't try. When we all think that what matters most are the differences between us. There's a story about 2 strangers who were drifting out to sea on an oarless boat. Neither person knew where they were going or how long it would take to get there. So to pass the time, they started a conversation about religion. If you don't want to have this conversation, don't do it on an oarless boat. To their surprise, they had quite a lot in common. This story might be familiar to you. Do you believe in God? The first one asked. Yes, the second one answered. Me too, replied the first, and asked, are you a Christian or a Jew? I'm a Christian, the second one answered. Oh, me too, replied the first, and this time with a little more excitement. Would you describe yourself as a Protestant or a Catholic? I'm a Protestant, the second one responded. Oh, me too, replied the first. Things were just getting better and better. What franchise? I'm a Baptist, the second one answered. Oh, me too, replied the first. Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist? I am a Northern Baptist, the second responded. Oh, me too, my friend, replied the first. What a joy it was. So, of course, the questions continued. Are you a Northern Conservative Baptist or a Northern Liberal Baptist? I'm a Northern Conservative Baptist, the second one said, and then heard, me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region or Northern Conservative Baptist Eastern region? And the first one asked, and I'm Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region, said the second one. Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879 or Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912, the first one asked. And the second one responded, I'm the Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. And the first one said, oh no, not so, die, you blaspheming heretic, and pushed the second one overboard over the edge of the oarless boat that was gently drifting out to sea. The rules of faith are supposed to keep us safe, but sometimes they don't. And so we have to fashion something new. The rules of life are supposed to keep us safe, and sometimes they don't. The rules of life were not keeping Katie safe, so she tried to fashion something new with alcohol, but it wasn't working for her. So she and her family did something that they had never done before. They became honest with themselves. When the problems came up for Katie and her family, Katie tried to escape. She tried to drink her problems away. She hoped that the short-term solution of avoidance would work for her. Outwardly, superficially, Katie had found an answer, but that answer was going to hurt her over time. Katie didn't need a shallow solution. She needed something deeper, and she found it, fortunately. Not everyone does, but Katie did. And it was delivered to her in an intervention that was arranged, guided by a therapist named Seth in this example. Katie sat down with her family for a real heart-to-heart conversation. As gently as they could, her family confronted her about her drinking. She resisted their critique, even though she knew what they were saying was correct. Technically, the things that her family were saying were accurate. Her mother led the charge, which looked like it was going to be very hard for Katie, so she protected herself. She secretly put on some heavy metal armor that no one else could see. She didn't know yet that she didn't need it. Katie's mother drank as heavily as Katie did. Fighting through her tears, Katie's mother read from a letter that she had it in her shaking hand, and her words were these: "Dearest Katie, you know why we are all here. You are suffering from a disease that has taken your spirit away from us. Seth, our counselor, asked us if we would be willing to do anything at all to help you. And I looked deep in my heart and realized that the best thing I could do for you was to help myself." Katie didn't know until that moment that she didn't need her armor. She could take down her defenses. She could unburden herself as soon as you are able. Go to work on the lifelong task of taking down your defenses. The task of creating for yourself ways of communicating that do not sever you from others, that do not hide you from yourself. No one else can take down these defenses for you. This is the opening quotation of a book called Taking Down the Defenses by a Unitarian minister named Arthur Foote. In his first essay, Foote describes the central theme as personal disarmament. Quoting Learned Hand, the famous judge of the United States Court of Appeals, he writes, "Not until you have had the courage to meet yourself face to face, to take true account of what you find, to respect the sum of that account for itself, and not for what it might bring to you, deeply to believe that each of you is a holy vessel, unique and irreplaceable. Only then will you have taken the first steps towards the path of wisdom." So, in Unitarian Universalism, we have what's called a free pulpit, which means that anyone who gets into the pulpit can say whatever it is they want to say. In a room full of vegetarians, you can talk about filet mignon. In a room full of Republicans, you can talk about Democratic advantage. You can always say what is true for you. It's not a prescriptive statement. It doesn't mean that you have to believe what the preacher says. It means that you have to trust that they are being their best, highest, and most honest selves. So the tradition of the free pulpit doesn't mean that you have to shut up and take it, right? Because with the free pulpit comes the free pew, which means all along you have to be thinking and engaging and checking in with yourself. Well, I'm not sure if I believe that part. I don't know if that rings true for me. But not in a judging and evaluative sort of way, like if Hope were preaching and be like, I don't know, you got a 98 until you took that turn into like what you talked about your childhood, and then I like graded you down a little bit. It's not that kind of, it's not that kind of a thing, but it is a sort of way to say, I honor whatever her truth is. I don't know if I would have made different choices, but I have to think and listen deeply enough to really hear the rightness of that path for her. Does that make sense? My friend Jane and I would argue theology all the time. She used to make fun of me because I am not as biblically well-read as she is. Jane was raised Missouri Synod Lutheran. Do you know what that means?
Yes.
Okay. I judge from the strength of your laughter, you know how conservative that is. Yeah. Her father was a minister who was too liberal for that conservative church and was kicked out of the church. So he became a UCC minister, United Church of Christ, which is more conservative than we are, but not by much. It's a congregational church. You know, we are akin. So historically, we are akin. So before we make judgments, even on the congregational church right here, know that we are close cousins. Them is us, just so you know. The most important part in that free pulpit is the quality of the congregational life. Were any of you guys here for the installation that happened at the end of my first year here? Was anybody here? Oh, tons of people. Do you remember when we did the laying on of hands exercise? Okay, so my colleague from Montpelier, from the Church of the Messiah in Montpelier, whose name is Joan Javier Duval, did a ritual called the laying on of hands. It's a deeply Christian ritual whereby disciples lay upon the Holy One their allegiance. You know, it's genuinely like spiritually beautiful. in the sense of being close to heaven, in that sense. When it comes out in the Unitarian Universalist setting, it's not about the minister who is in the center of that field. So Joan called me up to stand here. She called my closest heart to be behind me, who laid her hands on me. She called my family. She called my dearest friends, and then she called the congregation in these concentric circles that widened. And by the end of the time, all of us in the room were reaching out to one central spot. I occupied that central spot, but I am not that central spot. You get that? That central spot belongs to us. It belongs to the tradition that we're a part of. It belongs to this room, this house, this church, to its actual owners and to its moral owners. The actual owners are you guys. We foot the bill. The moral owners are anyone who would look upon this place and find sustenance, whether or not they ever come in the front doors. Where's Jane? You put late lights in front of the church and sent a signal to people throughout the community that was healing for them. And that's a beautiful thing. Those people who responded to those lights are some of the moral owners of the church. I'm going to stop here on page 7 of an 18-page sermon. I'm going to say that the most important thing that we can do really is use our community experience, our church experience, as a means of asking ourselves the deepest theological questions that we have and the ones that apply to our lives. One of the things I cherish about Unitarian Universalism is that in its distance from the Bible, in its distance from the words and the stories as they are prescribed as teachings, it enters into the same tensions and conflicts and battles and challenges, using our lives as that example. So one of the things that Jane has taught to me is that I see a difference between her tradition and mine. And that's probably my ego that sees that. What I need to see is that, we are all kin, experiencing the same thing in different ways. As we go through these days, may we keep the brightest light, the bravest light in our hearts, in our spirits, and in our relations with one another. May we laugh and step on each other's toes and say the wrong things boldly. May we play our electric ukulele loudly and in public. May we shine with every grace that we have. These are our days. Let's use them well. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen. Jesus, Mohammed, Springsteen, Bono. You and I lift our hearts to the sky above. Let our best shower back upon us, shining upon the witness of the sky. Go in peace, go in faith, and go in love. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.